It's Spassky versus Fischer, a legendary rivalry. We're in for a king's Indian defense, and with Spassky as white, you know a ferocious kingside attack is coming. Spassky opens with the pawn to d4, and Fischer responds with his signature king's Indian setup. Both sides develop classically, building a solid center as black prepares to fianchetto the bishop. Spassky chooses the aggressive Samish variation with pawn to f3. He immediately launches the h-pawn up to h4, but Fischer is not intimidated, meeting it head-on with pawn to h5. The knights begin a complex dance. White reroutes to control the center, while black strikes back with pawn to e5 and then prepares the classic king's Indian kingside assault with pawn to f5. Both players make moves on the queen side, fixing the pawn structure. Spassky brings his queen to c2, signaling his clear intention to castle long and point all his guns at black's king. And here, Fischer faces a crucial decision. White's king is still in the center, and black needs to act fast. The engine says the much stronger try was to immediately strike with pawn to f4. After bishop to d2, black continues with knight to d7, and after knight to d3, pawn to b6 keeps the pressure on all over the board. But that's not what happened. Instead, Fischer plays pawn to c5, and this is a strategic error. It closes the queenside and gives white a free hand to execute his plan, and Spassky punishes it immediately. He castles queenside, getting his king to safety. The rook swings to g1, the knight leaps to b5, and the attack is officially on. Spassky throws the pawn up to g4, looking to rip open the king's side. But this is actually a slight inaccuracy. It's a bit too ambitious and gives Fischer a golden opportunity to strike back with f4 and create his own threats, and this is the moment. Fischer was just handed a chance to turn the tables. The correct move, seizing the initiative, was absolutely pawn to f4. After bishop to d2, rook to b8, and bishop to c3, bishop to f6, black's counterplay is very real. But back in the game, Fischer simply recaptures with pawn takes pawn on g4, and this is a decisive error. It hands the advantage right back to Spassky, who now has a clear path to win a pawn and take control. Spassky recaptures on g4. Fischer pushes his f-pawn forward, but it's too late. After a few more pawn trades, white blockades the position, and black's knight lands on g6, trying to defend. Now Spassky turns up the heat, and the rook comes to h5, and then the other rook joins it on h1. The pressure on the h-file is becoming unbearable for black, and here Spassky has a chance to end the game with a beautiful tactic. The winning idea was knight to d3. If black tries to defend with pawn to f3, bishop takes the pawn on f3, rook takes the bishop back, and the rook crashes in on h7 with check, winning a pawn and shattering the king's defense. But in the game, Spassky plays the quieter queen to b3. It keeps the pressure on, but the immediate win is gone, and Fischer gets a moment to breathe. Fischer shuffles his rooks, trying to organize a defense. Spassky brings his queen to h3 and knight to d3, rerouting his pieces for the final assault on the king side. The white knight completes its journey, landing on f3, where it eyes key squares. The rook lifts to h6, adding yet another attacker, as Fischer desperately tries to hold his crumbling position together. Spassky brings the queen to h5, and while this looks menacing, it's another slight inaccuracy. He had a more precise way to build the attack. The computer's preference was a preparatory rook to g1. After queen to d8, white can then play queen to h5, and if knight to h8, rook to h1 simply completes the bind, leaving black with no counterplay. But back to the game, Spassky plays queen to h5 directly. It's still a fantastic position, but it gives Fischer a very tempting and very dangerous option. And Fischer takes the bait. He plays queen takes pawn on g4, snatching the material. But this is a fatal mistake. It looks active, but it walks right into a tactical shot from Spassky that should win the game on the spot. Spassky strikes back with rook takes knight on g6. A powerful move, but believe it or not, it's not the best. He had a killer blow with knight to e1 that would have won a rook immediately. The move played is still winning, but it lets Fischer complicate things. And Fischer, fighting for his life, finds the only move. Queen takes queen on h5. This is a fantastic defensive resource, forcing a series of trades and liquidating into an endgame where he might just have a chance to survive. But Spassky is relentless. He finds the perfect reply, rook takes rook on g7 with check. Another fantastic only move find that keeps the pressure on and continues the winning combination precisely. Fischer is forced to recapture as his rook takes the rook on g7, and now the point of the combination. Spassky plays, rook takes the queen on h5. The tactical storm has passed, and white emerges with a completely winning endgame. A brilliant calculation from Spassky. Fischer doesn't give up, playing bishop to g4, A clever little trick, creating a threat against the knight on f3. But what's this? Spassky uncorks the brilliant rook to h4, an absolutely stunning move. He simply offers the rook to solve the problem, knowing that after the trades, his positional advantages will be overwhelming. This is the star move of the game. Fischer has little choice but to accept, and the bishop takes the knight on f3. And Spassky follows up with the precise bishop takes bishop on f3. Again, the only move to maintain the win, calmly calculating his way through the complications. Black's knight snaps up the pawn on g5, but this is just a final desperate gasp. The game is already decided. Spassky demonstrates flawless technique. He trades rooks with bishop to g4, and rook takes rook on h7, simplifying into a pure endgame where his king march will be the deciding factor. The white king begins its unstoppable march up the board to d3, while the knight repositions to c7, preparing to invade black's position. After such a brilliant game, Spassky makes a surprising inaccuracy here, giving Fischer one last sliver of hope. The cleaner path to victory was knight to b5. After king to f8, bishop to e1, and king to f7, bishop to h4, white's advantage is still crystal clear. However, in the game, Spassky plays knight to e6, and this allows Fischer a chance to trade knights and escape into a drawn opposite-colored bishop endgame. The saving grace was right there. Fischer could have secured the draw with one simple move. The engine screams for cower. Knight takes knight on e6. After pawn recaptures with check, king to e8, and bishop to f5, king to f8, and with opposite-colored bishops, this position is a dead draw. But, unbelievably, Fischer plays knight to h7, the final error. The drawing chance evaporates, and now Spassky is completely winning again, and Spassky doesn't miss his second chance. Bishop to h5, check, immediately exploiting the mistake. But Fischer is still fighting. He finds the brilliant king to g8, the one and only move to stay in the game and avoid immediate disaster. White is still winning, and here's how the attack continues. Bishop to g4, knight to f6, bishop to f5, and after knight to h5. White's pieces are perfectly coordinated to finish the job. Spassky is a picture of calm. He improves his bishop, first to e1, then to h4, and finally landing it on the crushing f7 square, completely paralyzing black's position. With all his pieces tied down, Fischer decides to go out swinging. But this last lash-out only accelerates the end. A more patient defense involved king to h8. Then, after bishop to g5, knight to g8, bishop takes the bishop on e7, and knight recaptures. Black is still lost, but the fight goes on. Instead, in the game, Fischer sacrifices with knight takes pawn on d5. It's a final desperate attempt to create chaos, but against a player like Spassky, it's simply not enough. Spassky calmly takes the knight, trades bishops, and places his own bishop on the commanding h5 square. Black's position is now completely hopeless. In this lost position, Fischer's king move isn't the most stubborn. The best chance to create some problems was to activate the bishop, with a move like bishop to f2. After king to c4, bishop to d4, bishop to e2, the bishop can try to gobble the pawn on b2, creating some distraction. But after the played move, king to h6, white's path to victory is even easier, as the king now has a clear road into the position. And now, the final act begins. The white king marches majestically up the board, first to c4 and then all the way to b5. Black is powerless to stop the invasion, and this is the move that prompts the resignation. The final mistake in a long and difficult game, a slightly better defense, was bishop to c3. After king takes the pawn on b6, bishop to b4, and king to c7, black can at least put up a little more resistance. But after the game's move, king to f6, white's king can now step into c6, winning material by force and ending the game. Spassky's king lands on c6, as predicted. The knight now hops to g7, preparing to deliver the final blows, and the position is resignable. And at this point, Bobby Fischer resigns, and Boris Spassky takes the win. The position is hopeless, down a pawn, with white's pieces totally dominant. Here's what he saw coming. Even after a move like bishop to c3, the knight jumps to f5 with check. The king moves to f6, but then the knight takes the pawn on d6, and after king to g5, black's position completely collapses. A masterful game by Spassky,